So hi everyone on driving fast foods plant-based revolution. Today we hope to shed light on the opportunities for fast food operators to help drive the shift towards plant-based. I'm Gemma Tadman, Business Communications Manager for ProVeg International, and I'm delighted to be your moderator today. We'll have three key speakers throughout this webinar. Bisig, Senior Project Manager on ProVeg International's Corporate Engagement Team. Hannah Lopez, Food Service Director at the Plant-Based Food Association. And Zoe Novic, Healthcare Program Manager at Greener by Default. If anyone in the audience has questions that they would like to ask our speakers, please post them in the chat and we'll have a little bit of time to ask them at the end. So we would like to start by giving you a quick introduction to ProVeg and to our mission. So ProVeg is a food awareness organisation, as you may know, working to transform the food system globally. ProVeg creates a global impact with offices in 12 countries across 4 continents with more than 200 employees. ProVeg works with decision-making bodies, companies, investors, media, and the general public to help the world transition to a society and economy that are less reliant on animal agriculture and more sustainable for all humans, animals, and our planet. ProVeg has also received the United Nations Momentum for Change Award and works closely with key UN food and environment agencies. So what's our mission? Our mission is to replace 50% of animal products globally with plant-based and cultivated foods by 2040. So, why are we all here today? What is the significance of fast food? So, in our busy and modern social lives, people visit fast food restaurants worldwide, right? And not only do these eateries allow for ease and convenience, but they also offer the experience of community by providing a place for friends to get together and share a tasty meal. With so many consumers enjoying food from fast food venues, just think of the impact that could be had if plant-based foods could be perceived as normal in these outlets, as just another option on the menu, as something that omnivores, flexitarians, and veggies indulged in, no matter their dietary preference. Plant-based food service sales would skyrocket, helping to push up overall food service sales too. Now, the plant-based food and beverage space is already worth an estimated $40.21 billion in 2021. The market is expected to reach $78.95 billion by 2028, with a pretty significant compound annual growth. Likewise, the market for plant-based meat alternatives is predicted to double within the next 5 years, growing from 7.9 billion in 2022 to 15. By encouraging a broader audience of consumers to try their plant-based options, fast food change could tap into this growing potential for capital. However, there's not only profit to be had. With plant-based options perceived as normal and more frequently selected by a wider variety of consumers, they could meet their sustainability goals. The environment would be better off. We'd really be able to make an impact on our Earth in crises. ProVeg recently published its International Fast Food Ranking Report for 2023. The project assessed the landscape of plant-based offerings at the 5 biggest fast food chains worldwide using our scorecard methodology. The report showcases the contribution companies are making to the plant-based food space. The ranking also highlights missed opportunities to promote plant-based items through choice architecture. And that ranking was the catalyst for this whole webinar. We want to help food service operators to seize these opportunities. So we've organised this webinar today to enable you to implement the most significant insights into your business and menu strategies. This webinar, as we've mentioned, is also being recorded, so all registrants will receive a link to the recording in the days following. And with that, I will properly introduce you to our speakers and to today's agenda. So first, we'll have Josh Bisig, Senior Project Manager on the International Corporate Engagement Team here at ProVeg. Josh will briefly summarise the key insights from the fast food ranking and from survey results on consumer attitudes towards plant-based eating in fast food settings. Next, Hannah Lopez, Food Service Director at the Plant-Based Food Association, will dive into market context for plant-based as it relates to the fast casual and fast food sectors. And finally, Zoe Novic, Healthcare Program Manager at Greener by Default, will share some of the most effective menu strategies for nudging consumers to choose plant-based. And so with that, over to Josh to kick things off.
Thanks, Gemma. Before I talk about some of the key takeaways from that ProVeg fast food ranking, I'd like to dive into some recent consumer research to paint a picture of what consumers are, what they want versus what they're getting. So I'll start globally, then I'll focus in on Europe, and then focus in a little more on the UK, US, and Germany specifically. First, consider the growing number of flexitarians in the world, people who self-describe as restricting animal source foods in their diets. Flexitarians make up the lion's share of consumers who eat plant-based food alternatives. According to FMCG gurus, flexitarians increased worldwide by 5% between 2020 and 2022, while the number of people who consume meat and dairy regularly has decreased by almost 10%. The number of vegans, vegetarians, and pescatarians has increased as well, though not by quite as much, as you can see here. But consumer behavior doesn't always reflect consumer values and ideals. A recent survey conducted by nonprofit Eat Forum illustrates the large gap between interest in plant-based eating, represented here in yellow, and current plant-based eating, represented in green. This value action gap exists in nearly all markets surveyed to differing degrees. And taste and price are big barriers here, but as we'll see in a bit, as a main focus of this webinar, a significant factor is also a consumer's physical food environment. Narrowing in now on Europe, in 2021, ProVeg partnered with Innova Market Insights, the University of Copenhagen, and Ghent University to conduct a large-scale consumer survey of over 7,500 Europeans across 10 countries. We just repeated this survey this year, and findings from the second round of the Smart Protein consumer research show an ongoing transformation in European dietary trends. We're publishing the second Smart Protein report next week. Super excited about that, and hosting a webinar on November 14th, where one of my colleagues will be diving into the details. And you can register for that following the QR code here on the lower right-hand corner. So I'll just cover a handful of relevant insights here. Currently, 51% of European consumers are actively reducing their annual animal meat intake, which represents an 11% increase compared to 2021. Among reducers, over 30% are specifically targeting a reduction in their beef or pork consumption. We also found that consumer trust of plant-based alternatives is on the rise. Overall, plant-based food alternatives are perceived as the most as safe, first, accurately labeled second, and reliable third. European flexitarians in particular now trust plant-based food alternatives more than in 2021. When asked what kind of plant-based food alternatives they wish they could buy more often at points of consumption, like in restaurants and grocery stores, plant-based meats and snacks ranked highest among European consumers. And if we zoom in on diet type, we see that flexitarians rank plant-based meat as the category they wish they could buy more often at points of consumption. And when it comes to eating out of home, only 37% of European consumers say it's easy to locate plant-based food alternatives in restaurants. And only 36% of European consumers think it's easy to locate plant-based food alternatives at takeaway and delivery restaurants. That's a stark comparison to supermarket settings where 48% of European consumers say it's easy to locate plant-based food alternatives. And now to wrap up this portrait of what consumers are getting, let's narrow the focus further still. This year, ProVeg ran another consumer survey to gain more insight on how consumers feel about plant-based eating at fast food restaurants, specifically, this time focused on key markets in the US, UK, and Germany. When asked about the likelihood they'd purchase plant-based options during their next visit to a fast food restaurant, 45% of participants across all markets said they're somewhat to very likely to purchase a plant-based option. We also found that a significant number of consumers, about 61% in the US, UK, and Germany, are in favor of including plant-based options on fast food menus. Of these consumers, 28% had a very positive impression. And finally, consumers across the US, UK, Germany said they choose plant-based dishes more often in fast food settings if there were more tasty options available. That was a lot of info in a short amount of time. So what are the key takeaways? Well, one, globally, consumers increasingly understand the importance of plant-based eating and want to eat more plant-based. Two, European consumers, go back, there you go. European consumers, especially flexitarians, want more plant-based meat alternatives and want plant-based options to be easier to find on menus when they eat out of home. Three, the majority of consumers in the US, UK, and Germany have favorable attitudes toward more plant-based options on fast food menus. This taken together, it looks like there are several barriers to address besides just taste and price. And those are number of options available and presentation of options. So we need more, better, affordable plant-based options presented to customers in ways that encourage them to choose those options. So now that we have an understanding of what consumers want and the key barriers, I want to focus on what consumers are getting when it comes to fast food. In order to assess plant-based offerings at fast food chains across multiple countries, ProVeg used its scorecard methodology to rank the 5 biggest global fast food chains in terms of the plant-based favorability of their online menus across 9 countries. And here we define plant-based as made completely from plants, containing no animal-sourced ingredients. Though major fast food chains in some markets are doing exceptionally well, the overall results indicate serious missed opportunities, both in terms of offerings and menu presentation. Across all 9 countries, ProVeg analyzed menu offerings. We awarded points for the total number of plant-based dishes across mains, sides, and desserts, and awarded additional points based on the percentage of plant-based dishes. Of the menus analyzed, only 85 main dishes were plant-based out of a total of nearly 1,500 main dishes. This means that just under 6% of main dishes listed across 43 menus were plant-based. And of those 43 menus analyzed, only 22 menus offered at least one plant-based option. This means that there was about a 50-50 chance that a fast food menu had at least one plant-based main dish. This is really low, especially when we compare these results to the consumer research I just shared, where we saw that the number of consumers who identify as vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, and flexitarian continue to grow globally. Those consumers want to eat plant-based and want more easier to find options when they eat out of home. In addition to the number of menu options, we also scored on elements of menu design. For example, how the items are listed, named, labeled plant-based. And we did this because offering tasty plant-based options can only go so far if you don't also use effective strategies when presenting them on the menu. We found that the average score, we found that the average score for menu design strategies out of 43 menus was about 4 out of 9, highlighting a serious missed opportunity in using simple and effective menu strategies to encourage consumers to locate and choose what few plant-based options exist. And out of all markets analyzed in the fast food ranking, we found the top 5 global fast food chains performed the worst on average in the US, with an average overall score of 5 out of 30. We also know that out of all food service sectors in the US, fast food operators are the most likely to think that plant-based eating is a fad, and so the least likely to plan to add more plant-based options in the near future. And given that, according to the CDC, on any given day, 1 in 3 Americans eat a meal at a fast food restaurant, we think the US fast food market holds particularly high potential for encouraging more consumers to choose plant-based compared to other markets. So I'm going to hand it over to Hannah Lopez from the Plant-Based Food Association to talk about the plant-based food service market in the US. But before I do, I encourage anyone interested in learning more about our consumer research, rankings, or interested in partnering with us, maybe you want to make a 50 by 40 pledge, to reach out to me at the address you see here. And with that, I'll pass it off to Hannah.
Thank you, Josh. Wonderful to be here today. Thank you for facilitating all of this and all of us together. My name is Hannah Lopez. I'm the Food Service Director for the Plant-Based Foods Association. And to Josh's point, yes, 1 in 3 Americans are eating fast food every day. And there is a huge opportunity for operators to jump on board with other segments that are doing incredibly well here in the US when it comes to plant-based foods. So we'll be talking specifically about data around consumer insights, behaviors, but also what do the operator mindsets look like for fast casual or fine dining or QSRs, which are quick service restaurants. A little bit about PBFA. So who we are. Sorry, go back. Yeah, thank you. We are a member-based trade organization with a mission to champion, strengthen, and elevate our members. We have over 350 of some of the most innovative, boldest, courageous plant-based members here in the US. We have a vision where values and business interests harmonize and create a plant-based food system that respects the dignity and health of all living beings and the planet. So today, we'll be talking about consumer insights and really overall, how is plant-based performing in food service here in the US? Over the last few years, the connection between plant-based food performance in food service and retail environments have grown stronger. And when PBFA first started reporting on US retail sales for plant-based foods only a mere 5 years ago, the industry was primarily composed of 6 product categories and clocked in around $4.5 billion in annual sales. This was circa 2018. Since this time, we now report on over 20 categories, and the industry has built a strong momentum powered by motivated consumers, innovative brands, and strategic marketplace partners who have bolstered growth. The consumer for both channels is largely the same, and cross-purchasing patterns and behaviors for retail and food service demonstrate that consumer loyalty and dedication to exploring delicious plant-based foods is very similar to eating in as it is eating out. So let's talk about limited service restaurants. They have nearly 78% of segment share for all US plant-based protein shipments. Manufacturer shipments are the dollar amounts of plant-based foods that have been distributed throughout the food service network. LSRs, limited service restaurants, are the segment buying the most alternative proteins, and alternative milks are the lion's share of this. But there's also large growth potential, especially for egg substitutes and alternative cheeses, which currently have a low relative penetration. So we'll see here that the dollar amount for plant-based foods is estimated to reach over $975 million next year, and this is in limited service restaurants alone. We can see the total plant-based volume for 2021 in the light green bar at the bottom, and then the projected growth in the green bar at the top. And we're seeing that the gray numbers are what is going to be trending by category over the next year. So very similar to what the data is showing over on ProVeg's side for the UK market, we're seeing that over half of America's restaurants are also showcasing a plant-based menu option. In 2022, fast casual restaurants had the highest penetration of plant-based meats, with casual dining and mid-scale shortly behind them. They're more likely to serve a plant-based dish, but 19% of consumers are actually indulging in these dishes across the board. So while there was a slight slowdown in food service over the course of the pandemic, the menu penetration of meat for plant-based meat in fast casual restaurants grew rapidly over 2021 and 2022. So some interesting protein options to look at that are happening here on fast food menus in the US that were popular in 2022. This is from our partnership with Technomic, and we're looking at, anything from plant-based meat alternatives like the Burger King Impossible Whopper to the Habit Burger putting a veggie patty on the menu. And what this is telling us is that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and there really should be enough variety and accessibility to create this equitable menu dining experience across the different segments, and especially where consumers are dining out the most in fast food. So looking at the fact that some consumers would love to enjoy this veggie burger option or a whole food plant-based option, and some actually want to try to have that one-to-one experience with their Whopper or their taco. So although plant-based dairy has higher menu penetration in mid-scale restaurants, especially back in the early days, circa 2013, they now have very similar penetration rate in fast casual QSRs, and they're actually making plant-based options more prevalent across the different segments, especially in coffee shops and boba shops. Plant-based dairy in general has a higher projected menu penetration for fast casual specifically over the course of the next few years. So different from plant-based dairy specific, now over to cheese. Cheese does have the highest penetration in fast casual concepts. Think about the Habit Burgers and the Veggie Grills who are serving a plant-based dairy cheese option. And they also have the highest penetration of growth across the board. So we're starting to see other segments jump on board to offer plant-based cheese varieties. So whether that's shreds or slices or artisanal varieties, which are definitely an exciting space for plant-based cheeses, down to cream cheese as well. So my favorite segment or topic category for plant-based is the desserts. So while we're looking at plant-based dairy to be mostly found in the coffee shops or boba shops, many popular restaurant chains are providing plant-based options in the dessert and treat section, which is a wide open space for restaurant operators to start getting innovative and creative. Because those that are seeking that indulgence or that experience at the end of the meal should absolutely have the option to have a dairy-free or plant-based alternative as a choice. So we're seeing Burgerville over to Baskin-Robbins, including a non-dairy menu option for those that want that indulgence, but maybe want to forego the animal product. So let's jump into consumer mindset, behavior, and outlook. with a whopping 43% of consumers agreeing that the availability of a plant-based menu option will increase the experience at the restaurant. That's an incredible figure right there. And if there's one thing that operators care about, it's how restaurants are creating this memorable experience for their guests to create a yearning to return. So if nearly half of them are saying by having these plant-based options available, it makes my life better, it seems like a no-brainer to me. Plant-based consumers are very interested in having these options, and they're planning to continue their consumption, so much so that a third of consumers are saying that they'll be eating more of these options over the course of the next year, which is 5 times the number of those who will be saying they will be eating less. So food service operators, they can respond to this, and they can do so by creating this menu option availability and accessibility and having these bold, exciting flavors. And to Josh's point prior, think about how they're menued. How are you describing them on menus? Are you calling them something delicious as its equal counterpart that entices consumers to try something new or indulge? So let's break down the consumer. About half of our consumers are eating a vegetarian or vegan dish at least 2 to 3 times a week. And they're most likely to be Gen Z or millennials living in a city and have an income of roughly over $100,000 a year. However, consumers of all ages are enjoying these menu options, and preferences for cuisines and ingredients, preparation styles, they do vary amongst different generational age gaps. So just like you would review your typical menu flow, how are you integrating plant-based dishes onto these menus to appease cultural relevancies and cravings amongst the different consumers that are already coming into your dining room establishments? So a majority actually plan to increase their consumption of these dishes. So nearly 90% of consumers did increase their plant-based dish consumption over the past 3 months. We're seeing that over 90% continue to either maintain or increase this consumption over the next year. So to Josh's later point, this is more than just a fad or a short-term trend. This is here to stay, and this is a part of the consumer's daily life, and they're wanting to enjoy, indulging with their friends and with their family across their daily habits. So whether it's school or work, they're looking for these products. So yes, we hear about pricing and flavor and all of the different barriers to having the incorporation of plant-based foods to menu. And although 66% believe that prices of vegetarian or vegan dishes have increased, they still continue to consume these dishes. And so when we're looking at a third of millennials and Gen X consumers are seeking out more of the deals and specials, about a quarter of Gen Z consumers are looking for a least expensive dish, which is where I think fast food will definitely shine. If they're having that consumer that is value driven, looking at creating and innovating a menu that surrounds plant-based options, but also hits their budget is important. So plant-based consumers, let's talk about flavor, and this will definitely get us all hungry right before the lunch hour. But they currently prefer Asian and Mexican-inspired flavors when they're eating their plant-based dishes in food service. So a common plant-based protein source are Asian-inspired foods like tofu, while jackfruit is definitely shining for the Mexican-inspired dishes. So since the pandemic, the percentage of consumers eating plant-based dishes in food service have increased by 33%. Oftentimes, we find that consumers are a little bit more experimental when it comes to trying something new or exploring when they're dining out in restaurants versus them in retail environments where they have to get all the ingredients, cook it themselves, follow a recipe, and hope that the meal is enjoyable. Food service operators are really trailblazing the aspect that consumers can try these new flavors and bold, exciting menu combinations that they may not have had the courage to do themselves. So the future of plant-based of optimism is very high. So while consumer demand for plant-based dishes in food service is holding strong, Operators are feeling a very strong sense of optimism when it comes to plant-based options on their menu. And 95% of operators who are currently offering a plant-based food or beverage anticipate that the sales of these items will continue to either stay the same or increase over the next year. We are also finding that, consumer insights are showing that they're gravitating towards terms like plant-based rather than the words vegan or vegetarian. So going back to Josh's point of how we're naming these menu options on the menus is very important, and to be inclusive. And with the growing number of flexitarians enjoying these plant-based options, there's definitely an opportunity for operators to lean into that. And possibly, maybe it's just integrated with their menu. It's not a secondary vegan menu that you're handing to the consumer when they ask for it. Having that equitable experience is first and foremost going to change the experience for the guest. So operators, strategies for creating a plant-based experience that's relevant and equitable. So creating a greater menu variety, offering these global cuisines and flavors like Mexican and Asian and Italian-inspired flavors, having options for those that are more health conscious that are coming into your four walls. Thoughtful menu labeling, and overall, the dining experience. It's the hospitality business. So we wouldn't treat these menu dishes any different than we would the rest of the operators' mindset around what they're going to put on the plate. So staying up to date with social media trends, offering a wide selection, having accessibility, and shareables. When people are dining out, they're usually with their family or friends. So how are we looking at that experience of bringing people together through the power of food and making it plant-based? So on the other side, operators have many factors to consider when creating their menus and deciding what plant-based ingredients to integrate. So we're looking at price and value, culinary support, our manufacturers and brands leaning into their operator partners and providing that culinary support if there's different cooking methods, whether it's fast food or fast casual across the board. Everyone has different equipment. So how does your product hold up? And then also product availability. So ensuring that distribution is strong and that manufacturers are having their supply chain checked out to maintain the volume within fast food, especially considering how many people are dining out in the fast food segment daily. So to wrap this up, with dedicated partners and operators, consumers, all marching towards plant-based, we are forecasting very strong continued growth ahead. And it's an undeniable opportunity that plant-based has in the world of food service, with the strong consumer interest and synergistic efforts between operators and ingredient providers. Now it is my pleasure to hand it over to Zoe, the Healthcare Program Manager for Greener by Default.
Thank you, Hannah. Hi, everyone. My name is Zoe Novic, and I'm the Healthcare Program Manager for Greener by Default. Thank you so much to Josh and Hannah and the ProVeg International team for having me here today. I'm going to give a brief overview of the implementation side of things and provide some strategies for restaurants and institutions to shift the food environment to promote culturally appropriate, healthy, and sustainable meals for everyone. So here at Greener by Default, our mission is simple. We are flipping the norm to make plant-based the default and give people the choice to opt into meat and dairy. We work with institutions to apply behavioral science to food policy, nudging diners towards sustainable plant-based foods while preserving the freedom of choice. And before I explain exactly how this works and why it's effective, I want to spend just a couple minutes addressing the question of why we're focused on plant-based foods. As Dr. Jonathan Foley from the National Geographic explains, when we think about threats to the environment, we tend to picture cars and smokestacks, but not our dinner. But the truth is, our need for food poses one of the biggest dangers to the planet. And, next slide, please. Thank you. Here you can see why. The most carbon-intensive foods are animal products. Beef, lamb, and cheese have the highest carbon footprints of any foods. And chicken is often promoted as the sustainable choice, but its carbon footprint, while it's certainly lower than beef, it's still 7 times greater than that of plant-based proteins like lentils and beans. Leading scientists are increasingly sounding alarm bells about our food system's environmental impacts. Many studies published in peer-reviewed journals have found that we cannot keep climate change under control if we continue our diets as usual. If the food system were to remain as it is, while every other sector, including energy, transportation, and buildings, became completely carbon neutral by 2050, emissions from the food system alone would take us past the Paris Agreement point of 1.5 degrees of warming. Luckily, there are some simple and accessible solutions to promote the health of humans and our food system and our planet. Now we can return to the question of why plant-based foods and offer some more encouraging news that reveals a critical strategy for reducing emissions while also improving health. And that's eating and serving more plant-based meals, which have half the carbon footprint of conventional animal-based meals and are associated with significantly lower risk of many chronic diseases. And luckily, we're headed in the right direction. Plant-based has been the top trend year after year. Over the last 4 years, plant-based menu items have increased 800%. You can go to the next. Yeah, thank you. In 2021, 62% of households bought plant-based products. And in 2021, 36% of Americans reported having recently reduced their meat consumption. And when we look at what exactly or who exactly is driving this trend, it's largely omnivores and health-conscious individuals. Just about half of consumers who buy plant-based products cite health as their primary motivator, followed by sustainability and animal welfare. And what I find particularly interesting is the chart on the very right that says 98% of consumers who buy plant-based meals also buy animal meat. And this is actually great news because it means that we don't need everyone to go vegan or vegetarian in order to encourage these nourishing and sustainable diets. We just need to encourage this trend of flexitarianism to omnivores who may not realize that you don't need meat at the center of your plate in every single meal. This is really the core of our work, making it easier and more appealing for omnivores to choose plant-based options and getting outside of the paradigm that plant-based food is just for vegans or vegetarians. Our work was inspired by the book Nudge by Nobel laureate Richard Thaler and Harvard professor Cass Sunstein. And in their book, they examined the profound impacts of defaults and nudges on human behavior. So a default being the option that you end up with if you don't make an active choice. So for instance, I can almost guarantee that many of us on this call have the exact same ringtone that our phones, because I didn't go to the trouble, and many people don't go to the trouble to go through the settings and select a specific ringtone for our phones. And that's because it's just one less decision to make in our daily lives. And also people tend to stick with the default or the status quo, partly because it's seen as the more socially acceptable thing to do. We have this subconscious assumption that if most people are doing something, it must be the right thing to do. We are social creatures and we like to fit in, and the surest way to do that is by sticking to a default. A classic example of the power of defaults is organ donation. And it might seem like a matter of personal belief, but it turns out that defaults actually play a huge role. The countries on the left that you see in this chart have an opt-in system. So you are by default not an organ donor and you have to actively opt into it. And of those countries who have opt-in systems, the highest participation rate is around 30% in the Netherlands. The countries on the right that you see have an opt-out system. So you're by default an organ donor and you have to actively opt out of it. And most countries where by default you are an organ donor, you have a close to 100% participation rate, which means that automatically you are saving many, many more lives. Here's an example that's directly related to sustainability, looking at the energy sources that businesses are using. So in the control condition, in year one, businesses were signed up for conventional energy by default and had the choice to opt into renewable energy. And you can see that nearly 100% of businesses stuck with the conventional energy. Then for the experiment, they flipped it and made renewable energy the default with the choice to opt out into conventional energy. And about 70% of businesses stuck with renewable when it was the default. And that stayed consistent over time. So these folks weren't willing to put in the extra time and effort to specifically request it, but they're happy to stick with it when it's the default. When you combine these two ideas of plant-based foods and defaults, you get greener by default. Right now, just about everywhere that food is served, meat is the default, and people have the option to opt into veg options, which usually only strict vegetarians and vegans put in the time and energy to do. But we're working to flip that to make plant-based the default and give people the choice to opt into meat and dairy. This way, everyone still has complete freedom of choice. Nothing is taken off the menu, but the more sustainable option is already the default. This strategy is flexible and can be implemented in any environment where food is served. It's also cost neutral and can even save money. It's also more inclusive. Serving plant-based foods with the option to add meat and dairy includes everyone by default. It includes the 30 to 50 million Americans who are lactose intolerant, the majority of whom are people of color. It includes people who follow certain religious traditions that dictate a vegetarian diet or exclude specific animal products like pork or beef. It also includes young people and communities of color who are eating more and more plant-based foods. Black Americans are actually more than twice as likely to be vegan as white Americans. And a third of Americans of color reported reducing their meat consumption in the past year, compared to a quarter of Americans overall. And in fact, more and more climate scientists and behavioral scientists are learning how to promote more climate-friendly dishes for everyone simply by changing the menu structure. In 2019, a study found that when diners are offered veg options throughout the menu and there's no separate vegetarian or vegan section, this increases the choice for vegetarian dishes. They also found that when people are presented with veg options as a base with the option to add meat for extra dollars, uptake of the plant-based menu items increases by 50 percentage points. And these findings suggest that presenting meat as an alternative or an additive option can help change behavior toward a flexitarian lifestyle. Back one second. And even the placement of items on the menu affects uptake. Placing a vegetarian option instead of a meat option at the top of a menu decreases the share of meat dishes sold by 11%, which translates to a 6% decrease of daily emissions due to food sales. So what does this actually look like in practice? I'll spend the next few minutes talking about different strategies that can be used to implement plant-based defaults in different types of food service settings. So plant-based defaults. This first strategy is to make the base of the meal plant-based and give people the choice to add meat and dairy. This is already very common for salads and bowls where the base is already vegetarian or plant-based, and you can pay $3 extra to add chicken. And studies have found that defaulting the plant-based dishes increases their uptake by about 50 percentage points. So here is a plant-based default played out as an example. This could look like offering burgers with different delicious sounding flavor profiles that automatically come with plant-based patties, with the option to substitute for meat as an alternative. And if you're working with a build your own station, offering a default plant-based base is super easy. This allows diners to choose an already delicious meal, and they can pay a little extra to add the animal-based protein if they desire. This strategy also reinforces the notion that meat is something extra and normalizing plant-based meals for everyone to enjoy. Subtle substitutions are another easy and effective strategy for serving more plant-based foods. You can automatically serve plant-based condiments, milks, desserts, and breads by default. This is more inclusive because it means that the needs of those with allergies and dietary restrictions are met, and the folks who might otherwise be left without creamer for their coffee or trying to make a lettuce wrap when they really wanted a sandwich with bread. And nowadays, the products are so good that people won't even notice the difference. We worked with one university that was trialing a vegan brownie, and we found that in blind taste tests, students actually preferred the taste of the vegan brownie. Plus, it was cheaper for them to make and had a lower carbon and water footprint, and more students were able to enjoy them. So it's a win-win-win. It's also less expensive if you're baking in-house, for example, using oil for cookies and brownies instead of butter. When it's not possible to make the base entirely plant-based, you can create a default by offering a minimum ratio of 2:1 veg to meat options. A recent study found that when menus shift from having 2/3 meat options to 2/3 vegetarian options, the selection of veg meals increases by 22 percentage points or 56% overall. And this is because when there's only one vegetarian or plant-based option, omnivores perceive it as the special option that's just for vegans or vegetarians. So if I don't follow those diets, I might think, oh, that's not for me. But when we shift the ratio and provide several different veg options, we also shift the decision-making process. Now people are thinking about the flavors that they're in the mood for that day, or rather than whether they identify as a vegetarian who would go out of their way to not eat meat. So here's an example of climate-friendly ratios. On the left, you see an original menu with very few veg options, and on the right, you can see the plant-based sandwiches scattered throughout the menu with delicious and enticing sounding names. Which brings me to another impactful strategy, which is labeling foods with names that are focused on taste, texture, and provenance rather than vegetarian, vegan, meatless, or healthy or low fat. This labeling strategy is already used in non-plant-based dishes, so it's easy to just bring it over to the plant-based side. Some people think that vegan means that it's less delicious and less filling, and others think that it's just for vegans. So if I'm not vegan, it's not for me. Another way to think about this is if you imagine looking at a menu and you saw celiac bowl, you wouldn't order that unless you had celiac disease or gluten-free. But if you saw a dish called Thai peanut rice noodle bowl, you might order it just because it sounds delicious and not even think about the fact that it's gluten-free. And the same goes for vegetarian and vegan. We actually, we worked with a software company, and after seeing this presentation, they changed the name of their vegetarian hummus wrap to roasted red pepper avocado and hummus wrap, and sales immediately increased. So before I wrap up, I'll mention a few case studies that have used some of these strategies. In 2015, the largest convenience store in the world, 7-Eleven, started using a subtle substitution and began using plant-based mayonnaise in all of their sandwiches and products sold in their grab-and-go section, which means that they were automatically reducing their emissions and creating more inclusivity for all of their customers. In response to the fast-growing vegan population, last year, a Burger King in Germany opened an entirely vegan menu. So that's obviously default plant-based. In the UK, Burger King has committed to make half of its menu meat-free by 2030. And they say, our restaurants are going to be offering consumers the option to choose for every product, either meat or plant-based. So the people ordering plant-based options aren't necessarily vegetarian. The number of flexitarians who just want to eat plant-based food more often is growing in Europe. And in Belgium, for example, one in three burgers sold at the chain is now plant-based. You don't have to update your entire menu if you still want to promote the change. In a recent campaign in Austria, the restaurant implemented a default plant-based burger. So when customers were ordering, they asked, do you want that normal or with meat? So this reinforces the idea that plant-based is the default and meat is an alternative. Blue Bottle, which is a coffee company in the United States, Blue Bottle implemented an oat milk default in their coffee bar for all of their West Coast locations. And oat milk sales immediately went up by 28%. So this automatically includes the 50 million Americans who are lactose intolerant. By offering the oat milk default, Blue Bottle not only created a more inclusive menu, they also decreased their carbon, land, and water footprint. So as you can see, there's so much opportunity for making a big impact in sustainability, health, and inclusivity. With some simple menu adjustments, restaurant chains have the enormous potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, water use, and improve diner health and satisfaction by serving delicious, climate-friendly foods by default. For more information and further research on these topics, you can go to our website, which has plenty of resources and information about how you can apply these strategies to your own restaurant or institution. And with that, I will hand things back over to Gemma. And thank you so much for being here today. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Zoe, and to the rest of our speakers for this really insightful webinar. You'll be able to find the link to ProVeg's fast food ranking report discussed today in the chat, which we'll post in there shortly. And I think there's also a QR code as well. I think we've got some time for a few questions from the audience. So if you haven't submitted one yet, now is your chance. So yes, let's have a little look in the chat and see what we have.
I can jump in here. So I would say it's very similar to how restaurants describe and menu their other options. So are you going to put that it's just a veggie burger? Are you going to put that it's a mushroom barbecue with grilled onions, delicious burger that sounds mouthwatering and craving? That really describes what's in the meal. So I don't think that these items should be treated any differently than really just making them sell and making them sound delicious and something that anybody would want to order, whether it is plant-based or not. I don't know if Zoe has anything to add to that, but I know that you touched on that as well.
Yeah, I would completely agree with Hannah. We do have a manual of sorts. It's a best practices document on our website, greenerbydefault.org, and it walks through all of the different strategies that I just mentioned around naming food items and placement on the menu. As we covered in this webinar, it's really about getting, and as this question also gets at, it's about getting, it's not about converting people necessarily to 100% vegan or vegetarian diet. It's really about getting all omnivores to enjoy delicious plant-based meals.
Okay, so we have a question from a restaurant owner who would like to know if there is any data on how the greener by default approach converts consumers to veganism.
Great question. We don't have any data on that yet, and I think our goal is to, like I said, help everyone see themselves as someone who eats plant-based foods. So our mission is not to necessarily convert all diners to vegetarian or vegan, but to see themselves as someone who eats and enjoys delicious plant-based meals. So we don't have any data on that, but that would be interesting to know.
It certainly would be. We have another couple of questions as well in some more time. Do we have any data of fast food plant-based options in Latin America? Has anyone done any studies on this area?
No, we haven't at ProVeg. We are actively trying to get an office somewhere in Latin America. But I would refer you to the organization Vegetarianos Hoy. They've been doing a lot of great stuff. They're based in Latin America and they focus on Latin America specifically. They just did a retailer ranking, so they may have something on fast food as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Josh. Do we have any more questions from the audience today? Okay, and with that, I will wrap things up. Thank you all so much for your questions and for listening to our webinar today. If anyone does think of any more questions, you can get in touch with us at corporate@proveg.com, which is our main email address. And enjoy the rest of your day, and make sure to read our fast food ranking report and the accompanying articles on our new food hub.